also. I'm going to spotlight myself. So good evening, everyone. My name is Elsa Marie De Silva, and I'm the founder of Red Dot Foundation. But today I'm here as the proud co-editor of this book, She Is. It's finally here. It's been more than a year in progress. And maybe in the chat section, you can all introduce yourself. I know a lot of people are from the Evening Alumni Network, and there are also friends and family who are joining in, not only mine, but also authors of the authors of this book. So please introduce yourself and just share, how you're feeling today. If you can chat and type it in the chat section. Sorry, I'm a little excited, so I'm fumbling.
Yeah.
But good evening, and again, thank you to the British High Commission and the Chevening Alumni Association of India for co-hosting this event with us. We are really thrilled for your support. And this book, She Is, really was, during the pandemic last year, I was thinking, okay, what am I going to do with all the time on my hands? Because all my travel came to a standstill. And I said, let me tick something off my list. And one of the things was to amplify the stories of women leaders. So She Is endeavors to showcase the personal and professional journeys of 33 women in India who have achieved success across various disciplines at great odds. It is also an attempt to spotlight the incredible work across the 17 Sustainable Development Goals that have been defined by the UN and signed by India. And we all know from the recent deliberations at COP26, we are lagging backwards, and we haven't kept up with the commitments. So we are not on track to achieve them by 2030. So these women are really role models and leaders, and it is really my pleasure to have this event today. Today is the first day of 16 days of activism that is spotlighted every year to highlight gender-based violence. And the book She Is, the name She Is very relevant because if you know India, you'll know the atrocious femicide rates. So there are millions of girls who are not even born. And so these women really, they're born, but they also have beaten the odds to reach where they have reached. And their stories hopefully will inspire a new generation of leaders and show that it is possible to surmount all odds, challenge the systemic, induced, unconscious, and implicit bias, get past the broken bottom rung, shatter glass ceilings, create new norms, and at the same time forge one's own path. And I see a lot of men in the audience, and several of them have personally, and I know for the other women as well, supported us, and we could never do it on our own. So we are grateful for that too. Because in a patriarchal society where there is a clear preference for the male child and male leaders, these success stories will give women confidence and empower them. From doctors and architects to judges and scientists, social entrepreneurs to business women, gender activists to fashionistas, our women in the book have accomplished it all. They have made a difference in reducing poverty and generating livelihoods for millions of people, improving health and education all over the country, nurturing the environment and other species so that we can all live in harmony, and they've shown us that the value of partnerships and collaboration is critical in this effort. So it is my pleasure to commence the proceedings, and I'm going to hand it over to Supriya Chawla from the British High Commission, who heads the Chevening scholarships at the High Commission. So over to you, Supriya.
Well, thank you so much, Elsa, and congratulations for your book, and thank you for documenting the exciting work and the accomplishments of our Chevening alumni. And I hope that you and some others will go on to compile many more such amazing stories. It is a very proud moment for us, and what better evidence than the High Commissioner himself agreeing to give the keynote address. So I'm really delighted to be part of this, and of course, all events that showcase the brilliance of our alumni. So well done, Elsa, and for this excellent book. I'm yet to lay my hands on this, as I was just telling you, but I can't wait. So good evening, everyone, and thanks for joining in today. I see that there are many colleagues from the British High Commission and the network. Many of our Chevening alumni are here, along with our UK-India Pledge for Progress partners and a host of others who I may not know. But what I do know is that you are all interested in celebrating the wonderful work that women do. I'm going to grab this opportunity to introduce Chevening to those who may not know as much about this excellent initiative. For those who know me, know I never miss a chance. So Chevening is the UK government's flagship award scheme that helps create leaders across the world. We have a very vibrant and diverse network of alumni who are leaders here in India. And many who have been challenging conventions, they've been asking difficult questions and finding new solutions, some of which will be addressed in the panel discussion today. So really looking forward to that. In India, we run the largest Chevening program in the world. And in addition to sending scholars to the UK for a master's degree, we also have a very extensive fellowship portfolio for mid to senior level professionals, which we currently run in cybersecurity, research and innovation, journalism, and leadership and excellence. So we have continued to expand the socio-economic and the geographical diversity of our applicants to include underprivileged backgrounds and first-generation learners. And this year, 50% of our scholars are from smaller cities and towns. And last but not the very least, we strike a very good gender balance in all of our selected cohorts. So if you are interested in applying for Chevening yourself or encouraging others to apply, speak to our alumni. They are our ambassadors, or look up our website or get in touch with us at the British High Commission. Applications open each year in August, and the scholarships and fellowships are fully funded by FCDO and our partners. And I will take just another minute to discuss partnering with Chevening, now that I've mentioned the partners. So now that we are the largest program and we'd like to stay the largest program and become even bigger, so we are on the lookout for industry partners who can co-fund so that we can support more scholars and fellows from India. It's a great opportunity to transform lives through education. Quite a few reasons that could motivate a partnership. Partners could customize the scholarship. You could fund specific subjects that are of interest to you, which could boost prosperity in your priority markets. Or you might like to build capacity by filling the local skill gaps, or perhaps support your organization's objectives. So whatever the motivation, if you wish to know more about sponsorships and are keen to sponsor, we will be waiting to hear from you. And if there are any questions on Chevening, I'll be happy to take them in the end. I'm going to stay till the very end, and I will stop now and hand you back to Elsa. Thanks, Elsa.
Thank you, Supriya. And I can vouch for the Chevening Gurukul Scholarship Fellowship. It's one of the most amazing experiences of my life. And I got to spend 3 months at Oxford. Richard Bryant, who's here, is our program director. And I have featured 2 of my cohort members in the book as well. They're both inspiring women. All of them were inspiring, but yeah, I've got Madhvi Mishra and Shweta Tripathi who are here. So without further ado, I'm going to invite Alex Ellis to give the keynote. Alex Ellis is the British High Commissioner to India. Previously, he worked as the Deputy National Security Advisor for the Integrated Review on Foreign and Security Policy. He was also the Director General in the Department for Exiting the EU for 3 years. And I can tell you that when we were at Oxford, most of the conversation was at that time on Brexit. And you know, it was at the start of all the discussions. Alex was also the British ambassador to Brazil and Portugal, and those 2 countries are also close to my heart because I'm a Goan by origin. He was also the Director of Strategy in the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office, responsible for developing new tools for improving FCO and government policy. Alex has worked in the British Embassy in Madrid and started his civil service career as part of the team supporting the transition to multi-party democracy in South Africa following the release of Nelson Mandela. And prior to this, Alex was a teacher, including in India. He sings in a choir and loves music, theater, and most sport, especially cricket. I wouldn't have been surprised. So over to you, Alex, welcome. And I'm really thrilled that you thought this event important enough to grace us with your presence.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So let me start with a thanks to you, Elsa Marie, and to everyone who is involved with this event, and an apology to my colleague, Katie, who I'm afraid I bumped into being able to give this short address. You may smile through ironic and clenched teeth that a man, once again, decides to take over the speaking role from a woman. Anyway, let me explain why I'm doing that. So first of all, thanks to the book, which I've been reading and enjoying. I think I even have Katie's copy here. Sorry about that, Katie, as I've been looking through it. So, and my first job in the Foreign Office abroad was in Portugal. And there was an extraordinary man who was the defense attaché into Portugal, and he was called Commander Rafe Wykes Sneed. If anyone can spell that name correctly in the chat, they must get some kind of prize. Let me tell you, you don't spell it how you say it. And he said to me once, or soon after I arrived, he looked at me, he was the sort of man who looked at you and said, "Young man, I have one piece of advice for you about this country." We were posted in Portugal. "If you want anything done, ask a woman." It was good advice, actually, and I tended to follow it after that. Let me give you a second vignette. Now, this year, being posted here to India, and I went to a fascinating group of people out for lunch, women who are involved in or trying to get involved in politics, and one of them, an extraordinarily capable CEO who wants to become an MLA, said that her father, who had held the seat, which her constituents wanted her to compete for, had said to her, "You can't do that. You're not going to do that." Even though she was, I think she's the CEO of a company, quite a successful company. She said, "Well, I'd like to." And the constituents said, "We really like her too." And said, "No, you can't do that." And finally, he thought about it, the father, and said, "Maybe." But the way he expressed that was to go and see her husband, to ask him what he thought. And that is a story which will always stay with me about patriarchy and power. Why am I talking here? Because I think that the cause of fairness and equality in gender is a great one and a long one and a very tough one. And if I didn't think that already, I would just read a bit of She Is, as I have, and read some of the stories, and it gives you an idea of just how tough it is. And I am lucky that I was born to a family with just kind of, in many ways, equality in it from me and my sisters. I married somebody who could politely and kindly point out some of the inequalities. And in a way, we don't have daughters, we have one son, and he's on the autistic spectrum. And through our son Tamash, I learned a lot more about fairness, really, and about inclusion, and about what it is to be excluded, and essentially what it is like not to have power. And that has had a very big influence, I guess, on my life. Those who have children, that they do, and that is one of the big influences which our son has had on me. It's, by the way, a thing which worries him a great deal less than it worries his dad, but it's a very instructive to see. And I come from very considerable privilege, and which, lucky me, and I had essentially been given a lot of power through my life, mainly because of my gender, partly because of the color of my skin, partly because of my education, and I've been lucky. And to be in situations where you see or feel the absence of power is quite an instructive thing. So you don't need me to tell you why we are here or why this matters, but it matters not just for each of us as individuals. It is clearly much better for the societies in which we live. There's no accident so many development policies are designed in order to give women more power to achieve better effects. There's a kind of tagline which was used a lot in the run-up to the climate change conference and COP, where women rise, emissions fall, and I think you could apply that in a lot of areas, actually. So it kind of matters. It matters for everyone individually, and I think it does matter for our societies as well. And I think it is so hard because it is about power. And any group whose power is threatened is going to dig in and be reluctant to share that power. And that is a very tough transition to achieve, but it is an absolutely necessary one to have a greater sharing of power and understanding of it in all of our societies. So how do we try and do it in the British High Commission? I'm very lucky. I work with a lot of very talented colleagues who think and act a lot on this, and the Pledge for Progress team and all the work that they do from Gender Group, and Rhiannon, I don't know if you're on the call, and others, it's a really great work that gets done to try and do that. We do it through scholarships. So as Supriya was saying, that we have 50% of our scholars achieving are women. I try to do it, and we try to do it through appointments. So 50% of our leadership team is female. We can try and do it through micro behaviors. So I always try, if I'm speaking, to get the first question asked by a woman, because of all the data which tells you that if a woman asks a question in an event, then there will be followed by many others, but they are less likely to speak until another woman speaks than the man would speak. I think it's just, it's just a kind of endless series of small and big things, which in the end will make the change which is inevitable and must happen to just give more voice and freedom and opportunity to women. And we do it in other ways. There's a great competition which we run in the British High Commission called Ambassador for a Day, and that's open to young women. And there was a wonderful woman, from a really talented woman from Chhattisgarh, who won this year. And those people we should celebrate and we should show them. And I think the power of example is very important. And all of the people in this book, many of you, provide that example. And there's, we can't kid ourselves. Examples matter a lot. Visible examples matter a lot. So one of the reasons why I joined the Foreign Service was because I knew a diplomat who I liked and thought was interesting. And so just that does have a big impact, I think. And finally, one of the people who kind of makes me think about issues around gender probably best is Caitlin Moran, who's a British journalist. And I'll just finish, if I may, by just quoting something she wrote in one of her books about how to be a girl. And she, I'll just read it to you. It says, "I have a rule of thumb that allows me to judge when times are pressing and one needs to make a snap judgment whether or not some sexist bullshit is afoot. Obviously, it's not 100% infallible, but by and large, it definitely points you in the right direction. And it's asking this question: are the men doing it? Are the men worrying about this as well? Is this taking up the men's time? Are the men told not to do this, as it's letting the side down? Are the men having to write bloody books about this exasperating, retarded, time-wasting bullshit? Is this making Jeremy Clarkson feel insecure?" Slightly British cultural reference, I'm sure somebody can explain that one. Almost always, the answer is no. The boys are not being told they have to be a certain way. They are just getting on with stuff. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alex. And you have really, raised some key points over there about the role of men. And honestly, I'm so fed up of manels, that is all male panels. And this book is like a tiny microcosm of the talent, expertise, and skill that is already available. So I think it's lazy on the part of organizers to not find the women speakers. I also have a crowd map for women speakers, so I'll put that link up for any of you interested. But the idea is, if you can't see her, you can't be her. And in a way, making these women visible through all kinds. I also have a podcast which recently won an award. But what I aim to do is like flood the market with all these stories so that nobody has an excuse to continue to have manels. And I love what you said about giving the first question to a woman, because men always, it comes intuitively to them. They just speak up, whereas women are digesting, the question, wondering whether they have all their facts together to even put the questions so they can have a rebuttal, etc. So, you know, we take time and we also have to learn to take risks, you know, but the onus shouldn't only be on us for the equality. So thank you. And I know you have to rush, but if you can hang around for a few seconds for a video, but in the meantime, maybe I can also invite Supreet to come in and we'll take a picture with Alex and the book, just in case he has to, you know, leave for his meeting. I can't see Supreet. So I'm gonna, yeah, and then maybe if we can hold the book and somebody from my team can click and then tell us when it's done. Okay, I see a lot of people clicking, so thank you. And thank you, Alex, for those lovely words. I am now going to, you know, remove the spotlight so that we can see this lovely film that my team, my colleague,
Elsa, interrupt Elsa. Before that, we all need a digital round of applause for you. Let's do a digital applause, and then you can play the film.
Tarun, can we do it after the video, please? Because I think it's not just me, it's a team effort. All these women have written first-person stories, you know? So there's the 33 women, there's Shabnam who has written the forward, Supreet has done the illustrations, another girl called Shalini Sharma has done the beautiful, stunning cover. We have Nilüfer and Sheila who helped with the editing. So it's really a team effort. So let's do it after this, okay? And I hope you like it. So don't forget to buy your copy as well and tell your friends about it. It's available on Notion Press, Amazon, and Flipkart. But now, Tarun, you can give all of us a digital applause as well.
I think everybody should unmute and give a loudest round of digital applause. Well done, Elsa, and all of you. Amazing.
Thank you. Thank you. And you know, this
Well
book
done, well
actually,
done, well done.
over 1 year, we've done it. And we've kind of added elements like the words and, you know, all these kind of things. But whoever has a book, can you please put it up so that we can take a screenshot again? Wonderful. So Sonali, can you please take it? Thank you. You might have to do two.
Oh, just one moment, I haven't taken. Give me a minute.
Sure. Okay, are we done? Great. Thank you. Thank you, Alex, and thank you, everyone. So don't run away because, you know, we have to hear from these amazing women. So between Shabnam, Supreet, and myself, we are going to you know, talk to some of the women, and over the next few months we are having many different events as well. So Archana Surana is trying to get us into the Jaipur Lit Fest or related events. We have an in-person at US Consulate Dosti House. Maybe we'll do one at the British High Commission, Deputy High Commission as well. And we also have the Swedish Consul General in Mumbai who wants to do a high tea and meet some of the amazing women in Mumbai and Pune and the Western region. So there'll be lots of opportunities for everyone to share their story. But today we've picked a selection of Chevening alumni, and we have also Kamla Devi from the Barefoot College. So I am going to start with Smita Mankad and Uma Rajaratnam. Uma's traveling in the car, but we'll see if she can share. So Smita is also a colleague at the Vital Voices Network, and she has written a beautiful essay called Mind the Gap, Women Are Catching Up. She has more than 25 years of experience spanning the corporate, social, and government sectors, and a combination of both grassroots level work and board level governance, which is really a unique combination that gives her an unparalleled perspective on both policy and implementation. She is part of the Vital Voices 100 Most Engaged Women Leaders and continues to pay it forward through her pro bono work in women's leadership and mentoring. So welcome, Smita. And can you share one leadership story from your life which you have shared in the book?
Congrats to everybody, and congratulations on this fabulous book. So happy to be here. One of the leadership story, I think maybe I'd just like to talk about Vital Voices and mentoring, and you know, the impact that mentoring had. So I attended the Fortune program, State Department Fortune 500 mentoring program in 2010. And up to that point, I had not heard of mentoring as a formal discipline. So it was really an eye-opener and a game changer for me, you know, to have a group of women believe in you and commit to your growth and leadership, and to stay committed, you know, and to follow you, to see what you need, to keep helping. And it's an endless cycle, because you start to pay it forward and you continue to do that, and everyone you mentor pays it forward. So I think that's just, it's kind of become a habit. It's become a part of who I am. I know it's a part of who you are. Yeah, so just having that peer group of peers to lean on, having mentors to reach out to, having organizations like Vital Voices and others to, you know, who have your back, and there's a network which is global. It's amazing. So.
And you're a recent entrant to the Chevening Alumni Network, so welcome. And this is an amazing, amazing network. Any sector you need experts, they have it here, and they're always willing to support you. So feel free to reach out. Can you share a little bit about the SDGs you're working on? I know you work on pretty much every single one of them, but which is your favorite SDG and why?
So I think two. One is, of course, gender, and the other is, you know, reducing inequality. And actually, it's while I was putting together the story for your book that I realized how all the dots connect, because I do so many different things. I work with artisans and craftspeople, you know, women, livelihoods for women in rural India, healthcare and nutrition access, you know, bringing women to the boardroom and having their voice heard. And somewhere all the dots connect, because it's about bringing equal opportunity, first of all, and through that equal opportunity, making sure that, you know, inequality is reduced one woman at a time, one step at a time. So yeah, these are the ones.
And any advice to the young girl out there watching this?
Well, I think the simple advice is, just start doing what you can before we try and save the world. I think there's a lot we can do in small ways immediately. Sometimes, when you talk about SDGs or the global problems that we're trying to fix, it seems overwhelming and it kind of feels like, what could I do that could make a difference? But even if you do things, little things every day in your own life, in your own family, in your neighborhood, in your community, it's doable and it's achievable. And each little step and every little bit adds to making the world a better place. So I think the advice is just start small and keep at it, keep going, and you will find the inspiration to keep going.
Thanks, Smita. And Uma is next, but I think she is traveling and she couldn't join from her car. So I'm going to put Sumaira Abdul Ali on the spot. I didn't know Sumaira before the book, and I really, really enjoyed reading her story as well as learning from it. She's really brave and fearless. She has taken on the sand mining mafia in Mumbai. She works on noise pollution and she's the founder of Aavas. So Sumaira, I can't see you, but maybe, yeah, hi. So can you share a little bit about, if you were to go back to your 16-year-old self, what would you tell her?
I can't even remember my 16-year-old self, you could say. And Elsa, you have put me on the spot because I'm completely unprepared for this right now. But I'd just like to say that, maybe if I were to speak to myself or any 16-year-old, I would just say that you don't know what you can and can't do until you've tried. So anything that you see that is out there and that you want to do because you feel it's something that should be done, and maybe people don't support you, maybe people laugh at you as they did at me, because sand mining and noise pollution were not issues which anyone could take seriously. And I mean, I've been hearing about mentors and men mentoring you, but nobody thought that these were serious issues. So I think what I would say to my 16-year-old self was trust yourself and just keep doing what you have to do, because you don't know that small action that you take today, what's going to happen. But if you think it should be done, then trust yourself.
Thank you. And we live in this beautiful city of Mumbai and we take so much for granted, but there are people like you who are putting your own lives at risk to take on all these mafias and work on these difficult issues. So thank you so much. I noticed Uma is here. So hi, Uma. Can you switch on your video so that we can pin you? So Uma has recently joined the WHO, I think. Maybe she can tell you about it. But she used to head the Applied Research and Collaboration Center at Enzin, which looked into the future of energy and water networks. And they do collaborative research and bring together the best ideas and brightest minds from across the globe to define, influence, and prepare for the future of energy and water, really important topics. So Uma, can you share a little bit about your current role and what is your one takeaway from your leadership journey? Is she there? Oh, I think she's still joining. So maybe we'll just move on and ask her later. So I'm going to hand it over to Shabnam Siddiqui, who is an amazing force in the Chevening Alumni Network. She's a great believer and practitioner of collective action. She is the officiating executive director, United Nations Global Compact Network India. She's also a wildlife photographer and a passionate biodiversity conservationist. And she has written a very hard-hitting foreword, which I really love. So over to you, Shabnam. Maybe you can share one lesson from your leadership journey. Shabnam, you're on mute. I have no clue why Shabnam can't be seen. Can anyone see Shabnam? Because she can be seen.
I think she has just logged out. Her network is creating issues.
Yeah, so maybe I pass it on to Supreet. Today, technology is not our friend, but Supreet is my amazing co-conspirator on several things, including this book. So over to you, Supreet.
Thank you, Elsa. And I am so excited to see all of you here. It is, you know, when this book, okay, so I'm going to take a minute to talk about the book because I didn't get the chance today. And I really want to tell you that this book started as just an idea which was being floated around. And then all of a sudden we said, this is what we are going to do for the next 1 year. And I think Elsa worked so hard on it to bring in all of you here on one page where we could tell your stories. And she would send me all these stories one by one. And she would say, have you read this? Can you edit this? And I was like, wow, these women are so amazing. So I am extremely inspired by everyone's story. There's so much more for us to do to be able to be in a book like that at some point, and hopefully we will be. But thank you so much for all the motivation you give all the other girls who are here and who will be reading this book. So I don't know if Kamla Devi is here. Kamla Devi ki maine kahani jab padhi thi, I think that was the story we read first. I read first and I was like, इनसे मिलना पड़ेगा किसी दिन. But I am not sure अगर वो यहाँ पे है. Elsa, is she there? I can't see Kamla Devi here.
I know Mona Lisa is here. Mona Lisa, is Kamla Devi here? Because I can't see her.
Even I can't see her.
Hi, Elsa. Kamla Devi's internet is a little, I mean, she's not able to connect. I have asked her to log in whenever she can. So I'll let you know once she joins in.
Okay.
Will that work?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that'll work.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mona Lisa. So I hope Kamla Devi is able to join us. If not, I just want to tell you a little small thing about her. She comes from this small little village in the Ajmer district of Rajasthan. And she's the first woman solar engineer. And she's been trying to bring light one village at a time from the time she started and she became that engineer. So she has such a huge number of people who probably thank her because they have electricity. They have solar energy. So anyway, when she comes, I'll talk to her because I was really excited of meeting her. But let's go to Dipali. I can see Dipali right in front of me. And you know, initially when we started doing this book, I was going to sketch all your faces. So I was doing charcoal sketches, and Dipali, yours was one of the most difficult faces I came across. And then I said, I think we need to go on the illustration on the computer because I'm finding this difficult. But your story is amazing. And I just want to tell everyone about her. She is an incisive professional with more than 26 years experience in environmental management and pollution control in sugar and distillery industry. She's a NABED approved EIA coordinator and expert, a recognized guide for PhD, and has worked on several projects with the CPCB. She loves to travel, read, cook, and interact with people from different cultures. She dreams of a clean, green future with equal opportunities for women. And I know that she loves to climb up the monkey ladder. So, Dipali, so I would like to know, what inspired you, what motivated you to go into this absolutely man-oriented space and say, I'm going to climb that monkey ladder?
See, right from the beginning, I mean, growing up, I was the eldest of 3 girls. My father was an army officer, and we were never taught to say no, largely brought up by my mother. There was nothing that we couldn't do. And I chose a career first when after my 12th standard, I decided to do microbiology. But then I wanted to do something action oriented. And then I switched for my master's, I went into environmental science. Now, this was in '94 when I did my master's, and despite the hype about the Rio conferences, that there weren't that many opportunities open for environmental professionals, leave aside women. And so when I got this opportunity here, I mean, it was just on a research project. I mean, it's still my first job till date. I never thought that I would end up staying there for so many years. But I mean, I loved what I did, and so here I am. And so this sugar industry, I mean, it's like environmental science, which is not just science, but has this whole social aspect to it also. The sugar industry also, I mean, it's transformed rural India if you see it. The amount of socio-economic transformation it has brought about in the rural areas. But then again, it's a male-dominated field. And I used to go to these places, travel by bus in those days for a long time. And then typically, even the industry side, you have more men working there. So as I mentioned in my book, I went there and there was this huge biogas plant, and it didn't have that typical staircase. So the staff there, not used to seeing women, they said, "You really want to climb up there?" I said, "Yeah, of course." So that's like kind of stuck with me for so many years, that the people have to get used to seeing women out there. And as Elsa's put, I would say it's the tagline of the book, that if you can't see her, you can't be her. There is so much change that is happening these days. And it's very encouraging to see, a lot of women come into the field. It's been 27 years now. I would often also, when I would be sent for troubleshooting at these factories in the initial years, even after, having some 7-8 years of experience, there were calls to my office and to my director saying, "Ki kis bachchi ko bhej diya?" And you send somebody who's not experienced. But now from that point to now, when I specifically get called to troubleshoot, that is so much of a change. Then when you see today your students working in the field, I have also trained so many people. I coordinate a master's degree course, and we also train so many people from the sugar and distillery industry. Also organize trainings for the Central Pollution Control Board. So, you run into people who are sort of doing the kind of work that you do, and it's inspiring to see them also carry forward the work. Yeah, and of course, Shevening was a very changing factor in my life. I didn't have any prior international exposure. And what Elsa was saying, that we also need to speak. In fact, the one-on-one session that we had with our faculty, the pre-departure briefing thing, my faculty, especially from the University of Manchester in Bradford, they took me aside and they told me that, "Dipali, you need to speak up. You're as good as any of the others that we have selected. And it's okay to be polite, but if you want to be heard, you need to speak up." So I think that's what a lot of women need to learn today, that I mean, they are good, and they should remove the self-doubt and learn to speak up and make themselves heard.
That's so true. Thank you so much, Dipali. And I think you took your, you're an army kid, I'm an army kid. I understand leadership was probably never something you had to second guess, but you took that first step and on that ladder, and I think it's only been an upward journey, and it's very inspiring. I'm sure everyone's going to be looking up to you to say yes to things which they have never seen any other woman do earlier. So thank you so much. Thank you. All right, so is Kamla Devi here yet? Mona Lisa, is Kamla Devi here? I can't see the chat section, that's why. All right, I don't think so, not yet.
No, not yet.
Not yet, okay. So we'll have one more a lady we'll be talking about, Madhvi Mishra. And I love how we are, how her title is placed. She's called the Curious Soul Seeker. Madhvi Mishra is a public health specialist with nearly 15 years of work experience on health systems and maternal and child health in India. She has worked and contributed to the growth of some of India's premier research and policy organizations such as Public Health Foundation of India, Population Foundation of India, and Oxford Policy Management Limited. She is currently working with the Indian office of Johns Hopkins University and leading a large project on strengthening India's primary healthcare. What is it that you've not done, Madhvi? Can you please unmute yourself and tell us where did you get this inspiration? Where did you get this idea of getting into public health? And you clearly have been taking the bull by the horns and you're going all the way out. So tell us some of what encourages you? What motivated you to be here?
Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much, Supreet, for that very nice introduction. So I'll just sort of rewind back to right after when I finished my master's degree from Tata Institute of Social Sciences, and I started a job with a small NGO. And the first place that I went to was the Andaman Islands. So that was my first job. Was thrown in from Bombay into the Andaman Islands. This was right after the tsunami. And I got a chance to do all sorts of work with women, especially who had been displaced after the tsunami and the earthquake, which had ravaged the island. And that is where my interest started in public health, because I realized there was paucity of healthcare. People were only dependent on the, as they called it, the mainland. Right, and there were no clinics, there were no doctors. There were these little health camps where people were on the mercy of international aid. So it was quite an eye opener. Then this was way back in 2005-06, and that gave me a lot of impetus, and that encouraged me to apply for another master's degree in public health, and that's how I started my journey in public health. So yeah, from there it's been onwards, hopefully upwards, and I've taken many challenges since then. So yeah, so that's how I started, Supreet.
Thanks, Madhvi. So you've had a long journey, and you've clearly been working in an area which is something where everyone looks to for the basic things in life. So how have you kept yourself motivated? What is it that makes you tick every minute and say, no, I want to move forward. I want to do this as well. And what is it that what about that can you tell the other women and girls who will be watching you, reading you?
Sure.
That you want them to take forward with them?
I think one needs to learn from failures. Not everything comes on a platter, and we don't know the answers to many questions. And I think it's important to learn from the mistakes you've made, and to have a mindset that it's so for instance, the research that we do in public health, so you have like randomized controlled trials, for instance. And if you take the latest example of COVID, there are many vaccines which don't succeed. Or for instance, there are many medicines that you have tried, or drugs that you've tried which haven't succeeded, which is a huge learning. So similarly, in all spheres of life, I think that's extremely important. One needs to learn from failure, and one needs to imbibe that, and not take it as if like that's the end of your journey. But I think that's a starting point all over again. So that is what keeps me going, because I think it's something that I learn from, and then I make sure not to maybe perhaps repeat those mistakes, and then continue my learning journey. So I think that's something that I have kept in mind.
Thank you so much, Madhvi, and clearly the curious soul seeker who's constantly learning and evolving herself. Thank you very much, and
thank you.
With that, Elsa, I will pass it back to you.
Thank you. And I'm going to invite Shabnam. Shabnam, are you there? Yes, she's there. So great. So over to you, Shabnam. Can you share a little bit about your leadership journey? Even though, you've not written your first person story, I really loved your foreword. So over to you. And I love how you keep all of us on track on the discussion in the groups as well, the WhatsApp groups.
Great. Thank you so much, Elsa. I was so delighted to get this publication, because especially even before reading the stories, the cover has come out so exceptionally well. And that is enough motivation to skip through the stories. I have read some of them, and it's amazing of how you and Supreet managed to find these women, capture their stories, and share with a larger audience. My journey has been quite erratic. I do believe in karma. So, like, some decisions we make ourselves, some decisions are made for us by an unknown source, as long as we persevere. And my work, I'm from Mumbai, so I'm a Mumbaikar out and out. And my journey started with the feminist movement in Bombay, which later moved on. We realized that women's issues are not the only issues. It's part of the systems approach. So we started working on gender, from gender to international politics, from international politics to governance. And right now I'm working with the United Nations Global Compact. And we are one of the UN agencies that is kind of a custodian of the SDGs in India for Indian businesses. So that is, in a nutshell, my journey. I'm more than happy to introduce my speakers for the day. And we start with, the non-formal aspect of my interest is that I am a wildlife photographer, but I do it only out of interest. I don't get much involved. I go to the jungles, take pictures, share in my limited circle. But here with us, we have the Tiger Princess. I think the first woman wildlife photographer of our country, in addition to being a conservation ecologist and photographer. Latika Nath is also an author, diver, hotelier, and interpreter traveler. She has contributed to Sita's Story and A Tale of Two Tigers on the BBC network, and to National Geographic magazine's cover story on Tigers for the Year of the Tiger, special issue of 2000. She has authored 2 coffee table books, Hidden India and Omo, and a bilingual children's book, Taqdeer, The Tiger Cub. She has exhibited at the largest exhibition on tigers, the Eye of the Tiger, with 37 of the world's top wildlife photographers at the Royal Albert Hall, London. And she was awarded the Photographer for the Cause of the Year 2019 by TL India and Southeast Asia. She is also, so we were privileged as Chevening fellowship to get a view of the coffee table book on portraits that she has done of particular tribes. And it's amazing. So whatever be the model or whatever we call it, Latika is there to capture them beautifully and capture the soul of the animal or the human that she's trying to capture. Latika, in your own words, what inspired you into the journey? And if you want to share anything from the article with the audience, please.
I didn't set out to be a wildlife photographer. It's something that happened to me along the way. I'm primarily a conservation ecologist. I was the first person to do a doctorate on tigers in the country. So I was the first Indian and the first woman to do a doctorate on tigers. It's been a turbulent journey since then. I started doing a lot of photography during my PhD because I was trying to capture behavior as I saw it. I'd always enjoyed taking photographs, but very informally. But it became more serious when I started doing my doctorate. In later years, I gave up academic research and started to do more work at the grassroots with the people that are the true custodians of tiger habitat in this country. I also did some amount of work with the UN and as a consultant to different governments. And then at one point, after I got married, I decided to go and live in Kanha National Park, and we had a plot of land which was degraded land, and I restored it back to being a forest and had a few small cottages on it where people could come and stay, and use this as a basis to set up a foundation and start working with the people in the buffer zone of Kanha on different issues. During this time, I had a very tough relationship with my husband, and he would not let me do very much photography because that was what he was interested in, and it was too much of a competition. So for 10 or 11 years, I did not pick up a camera. Subsequent to separating from him in 2012, I decided that, and I had to sell the lodge. So I suddenly was homeless and rootless and had no work. And I decided to travel. And when I started traveling, I picked up my cameras and with great trepidation started taking photographs again. And occasionally I would post some of these pictures on Facebook, and there was growing interest in my work. And I realized that I had a story to tell. And that through my photographs and my talking and my public lectures, I could actually make a difference. So I started sort of giving equal weightage to my research and my photography. And now they form this beautiful, combination that allows me to present information in a totally different way to the normal dry scientific way. So it's been an uphill battle, and there's been a battle every step of the way, but it's just so rewarding and I wouldn't change it for the world.
Latika, from your travels, I'm sure you have many stories to say, but any particular incident, not necessarily linked to the tiger, but anything that left a mark on your soul for times to come? Because there's so many people you meet all the time.
So, I mean, I think one of the most incredible experiences I have to talk about, because we're talking Chevening and because we're talking about all the work that I've done. Post my Chevening, which was my master's, I was sitting at a campfire in Bandhavgarh National Park in the mid-90s. And there was one other couple at the campfire with me. And, they were British, and there was just the three of us, and it was a cold, dark night. We were huddled up to the fire and we got talking, and they said, you look a little different. You're not like the normal people we see in the park these days. So what are you doing? So I said, I'm here because I want to do research and I want to do it for a doctorate. And they said, really? And are you, have you applied? Which university are you applying to? And I said, well, I've been applying to Oxford. And they said, really? And what college? And I said, well, strangely, I've always dreamt of going to Christ Church. And the lady looked at me and she smiled and she said, would you believe it? I'm the tutor for graduates at Christ Church. And would you like to have your interview now? So we sat at the campfire and I had my interview. And she went back and sent me within the week an offer of acceptance.
Oh, wow.
And, it just changed my life, and the rest is history. So it was absolutely incredible.
It does sound incredible.
Yes. Yes.
So thank you so much for being a part of the book.
It's an honor. Elsa, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for, it's a real honor. I've read all the stories, and it's, I'm so overwhelmed at being a part of this great fraternity and sisterhood.
I just wish we had some of your pictures in your story also, but there were limitations.
Yeah, well, it's available online. If someone wants to see them, they're very much there.
Thank you so much, Latika.
Thank you, Shabnam.
My next speaker is Dr. Shalini Sharma. Shalini is the founder of the waste management company Sanshodhan, an e-waste exchange. It has been called the world's first tech-based CE, that is circular economy model for e-waste management sector, and has achieved recognition as highly commended by the Circulars 2019 of the World Economic Forum Davos. The organization also won the Global SDG Challenge Award from Responsible Finance and Investment UK and DD-CAP Abu Dhabi. Dr. Sharma has been featured on several media channels and has received the Digital Movement Award from She the People TV at the Bombay Stock Exchange. So to cover such a wide range and to think of the unthinkable is something that Chevening fellows and scholars have been doing. So Shalini, over to you. I don't.
Thank you, Shabnam. I'm here.
Okay.
Shabnam.
Yeah. So Shalini, tell us something about your journey, because I think you started e-waste management when most of us had not even thought about it. So what inspired you?
Yeah, so it was, I thought that, okay, I will just share my social story, what actually I did, but you just entered into the business. So I should say that people in India, they are not having a, say, accessible infrastructure to dispose of their waste. And it is not about the waste. When in circular economy, we think that it is a resource. It needs to be recycled and it needs to come back into the economy. So like everybody is really valuing gold. And if it is coming out of from a mobile waste or the laptop waste, they actually don't know. But you know, the India's biggest ornament companies, even like Tanishq and all, they really buy the silver and gold that is coming out from electronic waste. So my whole sole aim is to provide an digital infrastructure and accessible and convenient infrastructure to the country and people of the country, so that they can dispose their waste that is generally a resource, and we can really contribute to the Indian economy, which is now at present is around at 5 to 18% of loss because the way the waste is disposed in our country. But if you allow me, I'll just take to the social story.
Yes, yes.
Because you know me as an SDG 11, 12, and 13 person. But here what I wrote is about my personal story that is related to SDG 6.
Sure.
So this is a story like it happened in 2017-18. And before that, I was always questioning myself that if there are so many industries in India, and everybody is investing around 2% of their CSR funds every year, again and again, into the social development, why the social upliftment is not happening? And this question really remained with me for years together, because you know, I've come from India's largest industry association where I used to work before coming to setting up my own organization. So when I was in my hometown, that is in UP, Swachh Bharat Mission was at the peak, and people were really getting pooling a lot of money for the social development. So I just went to see the government schools in the nearby areas at my hometown. And I saw that there are no girls in the school. So there are just 2-3 girls. And I asked that what happened? There is so much of Swachh Bharat going on. Have you developed any toilets, etc.? Kids, it was hard winter. Like in UP, the temperature goes down to like even to 2 degrees centigrade in winters. And where in villages, it is like 2 degrees centigrade, 1 degree centigrade is very normal. And kids sitting on the ground. Girls were not, 2-3 girls whomsoever, they were having just in skirt kind of thing. And it was like winter, we used to wear so much sweaters and others. So I just tried to see what is the infrastructure over there. Can we do something? No benches, no chairs. Ultimately, the need is toilets. I wanted to see how much CSR fund is really spent over there. So there were 2 toilets and for so many children. And the half portion of the door down below was missing.
Oh.
I said, what kind of toilets they have really put up there? So if this has no meaning actually. And I also heard quite a lot that the people who constructed these toilets in bulk that are having huge numbers of toilet construction, there is no pit over there. So ultimately it is not going to be used after 2 days or 10 days anyhow. So pit was just like 1 meter, half a meter or so. So that was really, I was like, oh my God, means in this condition, how the girls are safe. Teachers told, Arey, this is because of mischief of the villagers. They have taken out the doors. Okay, putting all the stories together, but how safe the girls are? That's the question. Then how much CSR fund is being sent to these kind of villages where there is, for namesake, there is an infrastructure, but actually it is not available. Are we really going for the social development? What is really happening to the girls? This was like too bad kind of a question. I could not sleep for 2 days. That what is the condition of the country as such where we are going. Anyhow, for me, it is like, okay, TK, with God's grace, I can do something. So I donated some money, got that fixed. I ensured that it is working. I talked to the teachers, can we provide some infrastructure over there with the tables and benches? For that school, I could do. Only because God's grace, I can do something, I did. But there are so many schools, so many government schools. How many children, how many girls are really suffering in this condition? That was a question. Later on, I came back in 2017-18, I'm telling this story. In 2018, there was no ESG. Now we listen this term, environment, social and governance. And we developed a technology-based system to assess the success rate of the social development schemes. This NGO, Institute for Circular Economy and SDGs, we founded in June 2018 for this particular reason. Because I founded Sanshodhan, it was a private limited company. We really could not do on the social end. Then we founded an NGO. We said, let us see the success rate of social development scheme. And now people started talking about ESG just in last 1 year. We developed this in 2018. Unfortunately, there were not so many takers. But if I see with the industry point of view, when we talk about the environment, social and governance assessment, it is not about assessing the company for their expenditure. Actually, it is also the responsibility of the companies to see where their money is going, whether it is really doing some social development or not. It is for their own sake to see where the money is being spent, whether the donation is taking any real development on the ground and all those things. So this is what I do. I don't have any kind of hesitation in saying that if we say my role model, I say always Indira Gandhi, and I would like to go on that same path.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Shalini. I think living and doing things at the ground level is what is most required, and you are right there assisting people. So thank you so much for that contribution and to the chapter in the book. I now call upon Dr. Shweta Tripathi. I think from just this webinar, I've realized that the batch that you belong to was a rocking batch, it seems like, with the kind of development that have happened. But just to give a brief introduction of Shweta, Shweta has been listed among Asia's top 50 influential women in renewable energy. She has also awarded Asia's Women's Empowerment Leadership Award by UNGC, that is my own organization, and Asia One magazine. A multicultural person who thrives on collaboration, teamwork, and creativity. She has been honored with the FQRNT Fellowship from the Ministry of Education and Science in Quebec, and a DART Fellowship from the German Academic Exchange Service. From her story in the book, Shweta started very early, even while she was studying, looking at her mother's example. So Shweta, what would you like to share with us at this point?
Hello, everybody. Good evening. And first of all, congratulations, Elsa and team. Wonderful work on the book. And it's really, really inspiring to see so many women on this panel. And I am so looking forward to get my hands on the book. I'm still waiting for it.
Okay.
Really want to read the stories. Thank you, Shabnam, for the intro. Off and on, I was a child growing up in suburban areas. My father had a transferable job, and my mother had the hobby of teaching small kids around, children of maids and house helps and people like that. So whenever she was free, she used to drag them and try to teach them. And most of the time she was always complaining that they are not coming, they're not doing the homework, they're late. And every time the excuse used to be there's no light in the house, so we couldn't do the homeworks. And most of the girls, they would come running and they were half wet always. Why? Because they were carrying pots of water to their shanties and then they would come and start studying. So that was early on that I saw that these people don't have as easy a life as me. Later in life, there were other incidences, but it's just that the life was not easy for people, and water and electricity was one of the things that which we always take for granted, is not so really readily available to everybody. And this is more than half the population of the country. So it sort of stuck back. And then eventually, as I grew up, I started doing my work in water pollution, studied did a lot of academic research, but then decided that no, I want to be on the field and do some work on the field. And as I started working on water and energy issues, what I realized was it was the women in the family who were the most affected by the lack of these resources for the family. They somehow do whatever jugaad they can to try and make things comfortable for the rest of the family. But the women in the family, they go, they bring water, they compromise on the studies of their children to make sure that the family is provided for in terms of food, daily necessity of water. And then there is no electricity, so they are sitting in lamplight doing petty jobs like embroidery or stitching and trying to make some extra bucks. So these things really hit hard. And what I also realized over a course of time was that it is the women in the family, if you can get them to buy into your philosophy of how we can save, how we can be conservative, and how we can improvise our existing social fabric, it is the women who make the change most. So I have done a decent amount of work involving women and working in the water and energy sector.
So great. I think from your book also, which you'll hopefully soon receive, you're talking about disruption much before it became popular in the social development sector. So what kind of disruption you see going forward?
Yeah, well, just to give a background to the word disruption, I mean, while I was doing a lot of work on a grassroots level, trying to figure out things for, small slums or small habitats and districts and things like that, I realized that unless the changes are made on a massive scale, we would be contributing only to small pockets in terms of development, and many times things go back to square one after small interventions are done. So one of the things that I moved on to is that while it might not be looking very impactful, if we keep thinking of how we can do things better, that is the thought process that has to come to make the change on a massive scale. So what I started doing was looking at disruptions in terms of how we can introduce changes in small projects that happen in the water or energy sector, how we can bring in, the modern advancements like artificial intelligence, like robotics, into these sectors. I mean, they are laid back sectors. They are not very profit-making sectors in developing countries. And people are hesitant in doing new things. But the thing is, if we can bring technology to assist the existing projects and to make, things happen in a way which become much faster. Many of the problems that are associated with the energy and water sectors are delayed projects, and therefore people are suffering, and impact is not happening. So one of the things that I looked at was use of robotics, like underwater robotics and aerial drones in small things as doing surveys. And now drones have become run-of-the-mill thing for doing the surveys, but way back in 2015, 2016, when we started using the drones for doing land surveys, it was a new thing, and we had to really, strive hard to really, get the people to buy into the idea that, okay, you can fly a drone and get all the data that otherwise a person would go on the field and collect, say, for a month. And this happens within 2 hours. So you are reducing the timeline by 1 month, which is huge, both in terms of profits, both in terms of, and in terms of getting the data. So that was one thing. Then another area is dams. We have huge dams. They are architectural, massive architectures, and inspecting them is not easy. And people go inside the dams to, see if there is a crack developing or if there is something happening because of which water is getting leaked out towards the foot of the dam. And what we did was started using underwater drones to do those surveys, so we could see very deep below in the reservoirs and check the health of the dams, and therefore prevent massive disasters which would lead to flooding of habitations and villages, and even leakage of water, and small things that are ways in which one can think differently and try to implement. If they create a difference in some way in the energy and water sector, overall impact is massive. And somewhere in the middle of my career, I had this change in ideology that we have to contribute towards things which create massive differences, even though one cannot see the impact straightforward. The long-term impact of these ideas coming into these sectors is massive. So that's where.
Because I think even for the inspection and the accountability, the health and safety of workers who had to do that would be a cause of concern, and don't take away that. Thank you so much for thinking out of the box. I think we have had a lot of women thinking out of the box in this particular book and related to SDGs. So it's an honor and privilege to be a part of it. I hand over the deliberation to Elsa now. Thank you so much, everyone. Elsa?
Thank you so much, Shabnam, and everyone for speaking and sharing your experiences. I get so excited when I hear all these stories, to be honest. And this is only a sneak peek into the book, because we have 33 women featured, and today you may have only heard from 6 or 7 of them, but some ones over here who are there, and I want to just give them a shout out. And I know I'm going to miss people, but there's Anu Chowdhury, who is now an ESG specialist. Do check out her work. She's doing a lot through her company Sustain Plus, and she's based out of Pune. We have Mansi Sahu, who is an architect and is using her skill to design safer, inclusive cities. We have Neelam Gupta, the founder of Arrow, which is a ray of hope, and she works with thousands of people in skill development, and her story too is very inspiring. We have Richa Pant, one of my closest friends in the Swedish alumni network, and she just stepped down from her corporate job to start her own company, and I'm looking forward to seeing the amazing things she does in the social and development sector, bringing more funding to rural India and hopefully women. We have Shilpi Singh, who has an innovative business called Unhotel, where she finds locals who are doing amazing stuff, and she amplifies their work and does homestays. We have, Sumaira Abdul Ali, you've already heard from. So yeah, these are some of the women, and there are more. There's Rema Rajeshwari, and I think she was on the cover of Forbes. She's a policewoman in the Telangana state, working to dispel fake news and misinformation using WhatsApp. Very amazing. We have Judge Swati Chauhan, who has been in the family court system and has done a lot of reform, not only for how those cases are judged, but also with sex workers, to bring them dignity in the judicial process. So there's so many, I don't know, I just feel inspired over and over again. And as you can see, if I'm excited, hopefully you will be too. So also, I'm going to take this opportunity to show solidarity to the British High Commission campaign Pledge for Progress, and I'm going to continue pushing the boundaries for gender equality and ending violence against women and girls. And I'd like each of you to use the chat section to put your pledge as well. So whether you're male, female, or non-binary, please feel free. There's a lot of work that's required for equality, justice, fairness, and equity. So please put in the chat section what your pledge is. And maybe I'm going to ask anyone to unmute themselves and maybe start, sharing their pledge if you wish. So I'm going to remove the spotlight. So if you wish, put your hand up or just unmute and share your pledge.
I would just say, Elsa, I agree, and I pledge. Make it simple.
Thanks, Tarun. Thanks for your support.
Yeah, I agree, and I pledge as well. Thank you.
Great. And you can sign up your organization. I think the link is on the British High Commission's website too.
We have already done it, Elsa, as the British Business Group, as our organization. And so we're already on it.
Yeah, great. Okay, so with that, thank you so much. I'm going to hang around for 10 more minutes. So if you want to chat, you want to ask our amazing women questions about their life journey, please feel free to raise your hand and ask the question.
Just
Now,
with your
also-
permission, Elsa, I just say that all those who are in Delhi tomorrow evening, please don't forget some of the chief winners are trying to get together at India International Center from 7 p.m. onwards till the time you all can hang around and keep drinking and spending time with each other. So it's first of the Which Evening alumni events we are having post-pandemic, or rather post last 20 months, so that people can meet each other. So all those who are in Delhi tomorrow, please do come. There is no fee, entry fee, anything. Just come and be the guests of Evening alumni. Thank you.
Great. Richard, would you like to say a few words? You'll have to unmute yourself.
Well, it's just been very inspiring, Elsa Marie, and all your speakers. It's been so lovely for me to reconnect with so many old friends, but more than that, it just is inspiring, and I really commend all the work that you are all doing. From an Oxford point of view, it's really great to be connected, and I'm so pleased that we now have on the 2 Chevening programs I'm engaged in. It's really constructive, exciting gender balance. It's a great basis to go forwards. So thank you, congratulations.
Thank you, Richard. Any other questions? Or
Elsa, I just wanted to say that it's been amazing for me personally to see Sumaira, because when Sumaira had started or was on the brink of the major work with the Sand Mafia, I was in Mumbai. We were associated. We saw her theatre to see her now after a long hiatus.
Yes, yes.
Thank you, Shabnam. It's great to see you, and congratulations again. It's so amazing to meet all the other women and see them, face to face. It's a long journey for every one of us, and I think, thanks, Shabnam. I mean, what can I say? It's really great to see you too, and everyone else.
I do want to say that this group is totally amazing, because for all our programs at Red Dot Foundation, whenever we need mentors or speakers, and I reach out to them, you'll never hesitate to step up and give your time with passion, So like I said, every single story in this book not only has been a story of courage, but also there's this empathy in paying it forward. So that's what I love most about the stories. Yes, Neelam.
Yeah. So thank you so much for a wonderful session. If I may request, if we could have a physical meeting, that will be wonderful to meet in person, all the wonderful women and all the participants present here. I would really love it. And
Sure.
Also maybe can contribute if such a session, if you plan. That would be
Yes, that
great,
would be
great.
amazing. So let's do it. The first thing was to get this book out, because
I know.
anyone who wants to say something knows how difficult it has been to get the book out. And there were certain publishers who refused to publish these stories because they had things like, so y'all were inspired by certain events either happening in the country or in your personal lives, which got you on this journey, right? And you have mentioned it, but nothing has been mentioned in detail about sexual assault or child abuse or whatever, but references have been made, and even those were objectionable to the publisher. And I was like, how? If I remove those, what is the essence of this woman's story? It is these incidents that have inspired her to take on this path. And I actually consulted with Sridhar, and I said, can you share if we are on the right path or not. And he was even flummoxed that they actually said that they didn't want to publish it. Sridhar, you wanted to say something?
Yes, thank you, Elsa Marie. And I must tell you what an amazing evening it's been. It's been a wonderful launch. I mean, I have been organizing book launches for a great part of my professional life. I am extremely sorry that mainstream publishers, I've been in mainstream publishing. I've been with Oxford University Press for 18 years, and I was the director there for a good part, and then I've been in publishing since then. But that they would not, like to publish this for whatever kind of reasons. I have been extremely disappointed with the attitude, the kind of new models in publishing and so on. I was extremely keen that this book must come out, that these amazing stories needed to be read and to be appreciated and to inspire, because, and I'm sure that this will be a part of a series. There are many more stories out there. And I do want to share with you one story. My sister lives in Toronto, and she's actually a award-winning documentary film producer. And most recently, she's done a film called Bangla Surf Girls. This is on a group of very young girls in Bangladesh who are at Cox's Bazar, very near the sea. And as girls in a household, they come from very impoverished circumstances and very less privileged, and do face a lot of oppression and hardships in their lives. But they have become members of a surf club, and they have learned to surf in the open sea. And when they are on their surfboard, they tend to leave all their worries and cares behind, and they feel a sense of liberation and a sense of empowerment. This has now got translated back into their lives, and they have learned to assert themselves and to try to better their lives. So this is a part of an amazing film, actually, that my sister has made, Lalita Krishna. This has won some great awards. She's now currently the co-chair of the Toronto Hot Docs Festival. It won the first prize there for the best documentary. It won the prize at the Paris Documentary Film Festival and at the Vancouver Asian, and one more British Film Festival. I would like all the people assembled here, in whichever part of the world that they are in, to try and see when the screening takes place in your country or in your city. Do please watch this amazing film. It will inspire you. Thank you.
Thank you, Sridhar. Anybody else has any last words for our amazing women authors?
Just also wanted to say thank you to you, Supreet, and the entire team. I mean, every story is so inspiring, and it gives you like a fuel for 100 more years to run with the passion and the purpose that we're living for. Goosebumps happening every other second here. So it's just beautiful and such a sacred space. So thank you for creating this, truly from the bottom of my heart. And Supreet, such amazing illustration. I just loved it.
Thank you, Shivki. I wish we had more time. I was doing charcoal sketches for everyone. I managed only Sumaira's and Tara's, and then we didn't have time. So I had to switch to another form.
Yeah, thank you, Elsa and Supreet. I mean, it's humbling to be part of such an amazing book. And I mean, just the experience you had about publishing the book shows how things are yet to change for the better. They are changing, but yes, we need more change. Another thing, among some of the stories that I read, that yes, some of the women have had amazing role models at home in their mothers and their grandmothers. And I think we should pay this forward by being role models for the future generation. So I think this book will serve that purpose in a big, big way. So thank you once again to you and your wonderful team.
Thank you, Dipali. You make a great point. What I wanted to also showcase through the book is that there's so many women who paved the way for the next generation. So they just need to aspire to be bigger, dream bolder, and they can achieve everything. So yeah, and I see Armida is just entered and she herself is amazing. So Armida is the founder of Sneha, which works on maternal and child health. Also, it was started and she works in one of the toughest parts of Bombay in Dharavi. Armida, we are actually wrapping up, but would you like to say hi and just introduce yourself? I don't know if she's logged in or not. Yes, Armida. Okay, I don't know what's happening.
I'm not everyone, listen to everyone. Great work.
Thank you, and thank you for your work. So her story is also amazing, and I'm so grateful that you shared and were vulnerable with all your personal details. So thank you so much. I'm going to pass it on to Supriya back again to close it out.
Thank you, Elsa. I didn't know you would come back to me, but what a wonderful evening this has been. And I love the excitement and the kind of excitement that you're bubbling with. It's almost like you're listening to these stories for the first time, and you've actually compiled all of these. So just absolutely delighted. And like somebody said, I wish we can meet in person. And this book is going to be my go-to book when we're trying to put together, a set of inspirational women that we'd like to kind of bring together and kind of meet with our colleagues at the High Commission as well. So, so thanks a lot once again, and what a lovely, lovely evening this was, and what a great book launch and networking session. I never thought online sessions could be as exciting as this, and they were. Thanks a lot, Elsa, and everybody else here.
Thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful evening. And yeah, it's 16 days. We kickstart this, so hopefully there'll be lots of inspiration for everyone to work on this topic of gender equality and push the boundaries. So thank you, and have a wonderful evening.
Bye.